I'm Beth McGinnis-Cavanaugh from Springfield Technical Community College, here with Glenn Ellis from Smith College. And Glenn and I have partnered on an MSP START grant with the Springfield Public Middle Schools. The grant aims to increase the knowledge base of technology and engineering teachers in middle schools, which will hopefully then engage students further and excite them about STEM fields. Glenn, we're running a workshop in July for 16 middle school teachers from Springfield. And we've talked a lot about the workshop in terms of considering educational theory in engineering education. We have spoken frequently about fostering a deeper learning of engineering concepts for both teachers and students. So what do we mean when we talk about a deeper learning of these concepts?
I'm not sure we really know what deep learning is. I think we know what it isn't, and it's certainly not an example where you would say have a multiple choice test, you're just constantly regurgitating facts that you're learning in class. But deep learning is something where you can actually apply what you're learning. So instead of covering a lot of subjects in a shallow depth, you're covering fewer things in greater depth in a way that allows transfer, be able to apply it to different situations and contexts. I think those are the kind of things we're thinking about in deeper learning.
And do you feel that deep learning is currently going on in a middle school technology and engineering classroom?
Well, I think part of the workshop this summer is to learn about what's going on, so I don't know. I do think that the standardized tests don't encourage deep learning, and so it's certainly always a concern, I think, in those situations.
So do you feel that teachers are hampered by the robust frameworks that are mandated by the state and by the curriculum requirements in Springfield?
I think they can be hampered by that. I think also, too, that I think the frameworks aren't quite as bad as people might think they are at times. I think a lot of times people think that, well, I have to teach for the test, teach for the test. I think if you want to teach for the test, the best thing to do is to encourage deep learning. You know, there's no better way to prepare for the test than to learn something really well. However, I think a lot of times when we're kind of afraid we know a standardized test is, we're facing that soon, the thing to do is go back to instructions and this idea of going through facts and figures in a shallow depth with students. So I think it's definitely an issue, and I think it's probably more of an issue in reality than it has to be.
Okay. So acting or playing devil's advocate, how do we know that we can have any impact on student success? How do we know that we can do anything for the teachers that will help them achieve this deeper learning in the classroom?
Well, we'll obviously learn a lot this summer about how possible that is. I guess when in doubt, what I would do is go back to the fact that we do have research on how people learn. And when we don't work with that research, when we do things in different ways, sometimes some bad outcomes happen. So I'd say that the reason I believe this will work and have some success is the fact that everything we plan on doing is really based upon the research on how people learn.
What does that research show regarding how gender and or race affect student engagement in STEM fields?
And I think there's a lot to this research and it's complex, but I guess the thing I would start with, a lot of the research goes into a lot of details, but a lot of it comes down to is when we do not teach in the way which promotes deep learning, it tends to turn off women and underrepresented minorities. We've seen that over and over and over. And so I think the first thing to do would be to really develop curriculum which is based upon learners' needs. And so if we want to encourage deep learning, we should be thinking about where the learners are and what could help them learn more deeply. That would actually eliminate, I think, a lot of the issues now related to gender. There's also other issues too in terms of, say, having role models that would be good for women to see. For example, there are very few women that tend to go into engineering and so forth. So providing mentoring, working on a lot of times of projects in engineering classes or technology classes tend to be really biased towards males. So the idea of, say, building a catapult is not something that's gender neutral. It's something which tends to attract males more than females. So a lot of little details, but really it comes down to is really having a curriculum which allows a learner to take control of their learning. I think that'd be the number one thing I would do.
Okay. We had discussed just prior to this interview using the West Point Bridge Builder Kit, the Truss Bridge learning activities, as kind of a stepping off point to analyze why or if that type of project would not be attractive to girls or underrepresented minorities. So part of the workshop would involve taking a popular technology engineering project and looking at it in the context of how we can spin it to engage girls and underrepresented minorities more so than they normally would be. What strategies do you feel could be employed to further student engagement, especially for girls and students of color?
And I would go back to what do we need to do, and not even so much worry about engaging everyone, but if we really do engineering in the way that it needs to be done in the future, I think it will engage a much wider group of students. And so I think the key point is the idea of learning engineering in a context. So if we're just looking at details of how a particular bridge might work or not work, I think that's not near as good as looking at the bigger picture of how will this bridge actually serve people, how will it serve the community. So more and more we're seeing that how you actually design a bridge, that can actually be outsourced. We can have engineers in India and China work on doing the detailed design. So what's the role of American engineers? Well, American engineers are more in the role of being the big picture thinkers, integrating the work of engineers around the world in terms of creating that bridge, and in particular, making sure that bridge is serving the needs of the people in the community. And so I think the number one thing I could see would be to do everything that we do in a context which is real and authentic for students. And we know from the research that that will engage a much wider group of students, and it's exactly what reform in engineering education is calling for.
And we had talked about the concept of using story, especially at the middle school level, where kids are really interested in things like how big, how tall, how long. Can you talk a little bit about how we might teach the teachers to integrate that technique?
Yes. So the idea with story is that to promote deep learning, we really need to get engagement by our students. And so there are lots of things in the world that I don't care at all about, but if they're told in an engaging story, suddenly I have a tremendous interest that can really structure my knowledge in a good way. And so I think our ideas would be to help teachers learn how to use story to engage students in things they don't really care about going into the class. And there's actually research done on what kind of story works for engaging imagination at different age groups. So what I would see would be helping teachers think about different ways of using story, and in particular looking at the research on what type of story works for what kind of student, and then integrating that into engineering technology.
One of the other focuses of our workshop is to establish a learning community, a sustained learning community among the Springfield middle school teachers, and then hopefully expand that to other middle school teachers as well. How important do you feel the development of a learning community is for these teachers?
I think a learning community is critical. I think often teachers are isolated. I think particularly in this case because the technology engineering teachers, there's normally one per school. So there's no one to talk to on a daily basis. The idea of, we know when people get together and talk, really good things happen in terms of students, in terms of teachers. And so the idea of the community is that the teachers will be sharing what they do and potentially improving each other's teaching and really getting rid of this idea of isolation in the classroom.
And along that line, what type of professional development do you feel is important in this area? As we've already stated, we're starting with a workshop in July, a 2-week workshop. Do you feel that frequent workshops are necessary, or are there other types of professional development that may be beneficial?
And I have no idea what the answer to that is. I do know that when you do a workshop and you don't follow up, that nothing really changes in the long run. So what we do know is that there needs to be a really extensive follow-up. And I think the key thing for the summer workshop is to work with the teachers and understand what kind of follow-up that they would like to see. So if we believe in learner-centered education for middle school students, it's also true for the teachers in the workshop. What exactly would work for them, and let's work with them on finding what's best.
Perfect. Thank you.